Wisconsin football is in the preparations to finally go back to what really made them successful for decades, which is being able to run the ball, be able to control the clock, and just play gritty, hard-nosed defense. That's really what they have to get back to this year. And it seems like all things considered that they are in preparations of doing that. I really love the offensive coordinator hire, Jeff Grimes from Kansas, top 15 rushing attack in the country last year with Devin Neal, who was quite frankly sensational for them, and going against them this year. I mean, first and foremost, they are kind of unwinding this experiment that they had offensively last year when they hired Phil Longo. They tried to do this air raid sort of thing, even though they didn't really have the necessary pieces. And then also, granted, Tyler Van Dyke got hurt pretty quick too, so that just kind of went to shit. He goes to Sam Houston State, becomes their head coach, and now they're kind of back to square one more or less because granted it's his third year, and in this day and age of college football, people get incredibly impatient. I think fans need to be exact opposite. I think they need to be patient. I like Luke Fickell. I think they are going to figure it out, and it's just going to be one of those things where people are going to be patient, and they have a lot of young guys on this team. Definitely a lot of talent in certain areas of the field. However, there are going to be some growing pains. There is no good way to say it, especially when you look at how brutal this schedule is, how young some of these players are, and they're really going back to really their identity that they were decades before. I mean, I go back and I think of the program under Barry Alvarez. I go and think of Brett Bielema, and I'll even throw Paul Chryst in there, give him a shout out too, even though Wisconsin fans might get pissed off with me mentioning him too. But I think all three of those guys were, quite frankly, dudes that brought in that Wisconsin culture, that Wisconsin flair that distinguishes them in a ever so difficult Big Ten. You do have a certain culture there, kind of a grassroots. You're largely developing guys and bringing in players that you more or less know that you can develop and get more out of from a lot of smaller schools. And also, too, when you have Camp Randall Stadium as well, that's definitely one of the best environments in all of college football. And I think that this is going to be kind of the time where it's going to really come together for them. Now, granted, is it going to take another season or two to really kind of see the fruits of their labor? Absolutely. But at least on paper, you have to be at least encouraged based on what I'm seeing. Because if we want to talk about the offensive side of the football, I talked about Jeff Grimes a little bit last year, or a little bit a couple seconds ago. And, this is really an overwhelming stat for me that I have. 271 points are the fewest by a Badger team since 2004. And that's really an underwhelming statement, quite frankly, because I go back and I think to myself, hey, they have so many players that I think can be solid for them. I mean, you go back and I think this year's running combination is going to be Darian Dupree and Cade Yakimelli, who I think are going to be solid, all things considered. I mean, Dupree is going to be stepping up from that backup role to being the starter. He only had about 317 yards last year, so it's going to be a group project, let's say. And at the same time, too, you got to take this stat with a grain of salt, right? Because everybody knows Phil Longo, they're going to throw the ball every play, but they only ran for about 1,800 yards last year, which, not accounting for the 2020 season, that's the lowest since 1995. And granted, they lost Chaz Malaysia. You had Tyler Van Dyke, who was also hurt. And, also too, they just been having a terrible luck in terms of quarterbacks in general. Because, Tyler Van Dyke, he got hurt 3 games in, goes to SMU. And I also think of Braedyn Locke too. He's at Arizona. They tried to give him a shot, but it was really just an underwhelming fit altogether. But I think in general, I think Billy Edwards Jr. coming in from Maryland is going to be such a better fit for him. And Maryland doesn't get a lot of love in terms of the college football landscape, but I think he quietly had a pretty solid season. And I think they're going to be fine in the quarterback room. I mean, they're going to be backed up by Danny O'Neal. Another similar story with San Diego State. he was there last year under the first year of Sean Lewis, and granted, there were some growing pains over there being 3-9, but all things considered, I mean, at least on paper, when I kind of think about this program, there's just a lot of things that really just have not gone well for them. I mean, if you want to even turn a little bit on the other side of the football, I mean, I think Jack Del Rio was, he was supposed to kind of be his right-hand man. And then, he had to resign in the middle of the season due to some off the field issues. And, especially too, you can just tell that everything just kind of just really just fell apart because even, after that game versus Oregon, which quite frankly, they were in that game the entire time. That's when, the famous Lou Fickell, he received criticism for saying, hey, why does it matter who's calling plays until Phil Longo? And that was kind of the proverbial nail in the coffin for the whole Longo experiment not working out anymore. But at least offensively, I just expect this team to really go back to what their identity has been for the past 20 seasons, which is going to be running the football, grinding the clock, and just bullying you on the front, on the offensive front. Now, granted, they're going to have to do that defensively too, which I think is going to be, quite frankly, I think that's going to be an even bigger challenge for this team. I mean, you have to think to yourself too, they only had 17 sacks last year. And that's really just considerably underwhelming considering the majority of those sacks came from when they were playing, some laugher teams at the beginning of the season, like Purdue and South Dakota. And they were also last in the country with tackles for loss. So they were pretty much non-existent in terms of getting into the back of the football field, getting tackles for loss, and just the defense has to be on the field the entire game. And that's just, quite frankly, a recipe for disaster for them. And granted, I think this has been a common thread even before Luke Fickell came in. Even the last season or two under Paul Chryst, they kind of had a similar issue with the defensive line. But at the same time, too, we're kind of at the point now where those offensive issues have overshadowed Luke Fickell's reign here this entire time. And I think, quite frankly, it definitely makes a lot of people feel more pessimistic than they should be because, they just try too hard to be modern and they try too hard to try something different, which granted, I think more head coaches deserve credit for that. It's okay to experiment every once in a while, but I do give Luke Fickell a lot of credit for pulling the plug early as opposed to being, a Dan Mullen, for example, and taking 2 seasons to fire Todd Grantham. He said less than a season in, okay, we know this isn't working out. Let's just finish out the year. And then we have a fresh, clean slate to kind of work with. And at least defensively too, I also kind of look around and say, hey, there's going to be some solid pieces here, particularly in the secondary is what I'm excited about too. I think Nazir Farquian, assuming that the eligibility issue gets underway, I think he's going to be a fine addition. You have Jameer Latimer from Jacksonville State, who I think is going to be a solid corner for them. Somebody I think can play some nickel packages for him, and quite frankly, someone who I think is going to be someone who can come in immediately and help him out. And also, too, you have Austin Brown, who's going to be in one of the safety spots and probably one of the top tacklers of the entire team. But if Wisconsin wants to win some football games this year and turn some heads, the reality is that defensive front is going to have to be a lot better, particularly in terms of the pass rush and just getting to the back of the football field. Because that front seven was, quite frankly, just really abysmal last season. And they have to do more. I mean, that's really all there is to it. I mean, you also have to be excited too, at least talent-wise. You have 6'4", 230, Tyrese Fearbry from Kentucky. I just did an episode on Kentucky. You should check that out. But he's in his 4th year, and I think he's somebody who's going to come in and be super productive for him as well. So, yeah, they have decided to bring in a couple of transfers who I think are going to make a solid impact for him. And granted, it's not going to, these guys that are coming in are not going to happen overnight. A lot of these guys that are coming in, such as Charles Perkins from Georgia Tech, such as Corey Walker from Western Michigan, these are going to be some players that it's going to take a little bit of time for really all of that to come together. But at the same time, too, I think we kind of have to say to ourselves, Luke Fickell is the right guy for this program. And I really do believe that they are going to figure it out. Now, granted, you have such a brutal schedule this year, right? According to an ESPN analysis that they ran a couple weeks ago, Wisconsin has the fourth toughest schedule in the entire country. And for a team with such a younger identity right now, for someone that's really just trying to go back to their identity that they've kind of honed in on, it's really going to be a true testament to see where exactly Wisconsin's going to be, and most importantly, how long is this going to take? Because, granted, I mean, if you go and look at the schedule, sure you have a couple tune-up games in the beginning of the year versus Miami and Middle Tennessee, which is all fine, but then you go on the road versus Alabama September 13th. That is a brutal game, and I think it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see how this younger team stands up in such a hostile environment such as Tuscaloosa, for example. So that game could be pretty telling, a little bit of foreshadowing in terms of where they go for the rest of the season. Then they're going to be going to Maryland. I think it'd be a little bit more fascinating if they were going to Maryland just because of the Billy Edwards situation. But granted, you could really realistically be in a situation where they start 3-1, and that'd be super positive. And then you're on the road versus Michigan October 4th for your second Big Ten game. So that's going to be a tough slate. But read this after this. So you go on the road versus Michigan, then you host Iowa, then you host Ohio State, and then you're on the road against Oregon before a bye week, and then you have Washington. That's, man, I think there's going to be some tough sledding here. And I know some of the stats that I threw out makes this whole situation seem almost overwhelming. And yeah, it probably is a little bit overwhelming to a degree, right? Because you pretty much have to sit there and say to yourself as a Wisconsin fan, you're going to have to really get 5 wins is going to be a pretty strong season for them. And 3 of those games are going to come before your Big Ten season really starts. And all things considered, this season's really going to be more about, is the identity there? Are the younger talents that they're bringing in the guys that they really know that they can kind of build upon? And the other question that I'm going to have too is just, can they obviously find that balance between trying to be a little bit more modern and ever changing game of college football versus still having that grassroots culture that I think people love about Wisconsin, and the reason why so many fans are so passionate about them. But in any event, I think there's going to be some tough sledding. It's going to be a difficult time for them. You have one of the toughest schedules in the entire country, but at the same time, when you have a guy like Luke Fickell, you bring in a guy like Jeff Grimes, I think Mike Trussell is going to be one of the young and bright minds in college football. I think he's going to be a guy that we're talking about as a head coach 5 seasons from now. I wouldn't be surprised. So